8 most drunk Johnny Carson guests of all time. For 30 years, Johnny Carson reigned as the undisputed king of late night, welcoming Hollywood's biggest stars into America's living rooms with his trademark charm and impeccable timing. But behind that perfectly orchestrated Tonight Show facade lurked television's most unpredictable wildcard: celebrities who'd had a few too many before the cameras started rolling. In an era before publicists micromanaged every interview and social media could instantly document a career-ending gaffe, stars would sometimes arrive at NBC's Burbank studios. 3 sheets to the wind, creating moments of television, both legendary and cringe-worthy. Today, we're counting down the 8 most notoriously intoxicated guests ever to slur their way through The Tonight Show. Moments the network executives wish they could forget, but viewers never would. From Oscar-winning legends who couldn't remember where they were to Hollywood icons who nearly fell off the famous couch, these weren't just awkward interviews. They were live television teetering on the edge of disaster. And what's most fascinating is how Carson handled these unpredictable situations. Sometimes with grace, sometimes with visible frustration, but always with the quick wit that made him a legend. So pour yourself something strong, though perhaps not as strong as what these celebrities had, and enjoy the countdown of Johnny Carson's most memorably inebriated visitors. What made these drunken Tonight Show appearances so remarkable wasn't just the spectacle of seeing famous faces under the influence. It was watching how the unflappable Johnny Carson navigated these unpredictable situations. In an era of live television with no editing safety net, Carson had to think on his feet when faced with slurring Oscar winners, rambling directors, and celebrities who might say or do absolutely anything. Some hosts might have panicked or cut interviews short at the first sign of trouble. But Carson typically employed a masterful mix of gentle redirection, strategic commercial breaks, and witty aids to Ed McMahon that acknowledged the elephant in the room without embarrassing his guests. Of course, not all interviews could be salvaged, and some celebrities found themselves permanently crossed off The Tonight Show guest lists after particularly disastrous appearances. Let's explore 8 unforgettable examples of when Hollywood's brightest stars arrived at Studio One in Burbank, having clearly made a few too many stops at the bar along the way. Towns, the hangings were all in public for the square, and people came for hundreds of miles around and turned it into a big one. Truman Capote, the literary genius who couldn't form a sentence. When Truman Capote walked onto the Tonight Show set in 1980, viewers immediately sensed something was amiss. The brilliant author of In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, known for his razor-sharp wit and incisive observations, could barely navigate the short distance from the curtain to the guest chair without stumbling. What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable 17 minutes in Tonight Show history. From the moment Carson welcomed him with a standard, "It's great to have you with us tonight," it was clear Capote was severely intoxicated. His response, intended to be a witty greeting, emerged as a nearly incomprehensible mumble that had Carson leaning forward with a strained, "I'm sorry." What was that? The awkwardness had only begun. Throughout the interview, Capote slurred virtually every word, often to the point where even Carson, a master at understanding guests through their nervousness or accents, appeared genuinely confused about what the author was trying to say. When attempting to discuss his latest work, Capote launched into a rambling anecdote that veered wildly from topic to topic, eventually landing on a bizarre story about Montgomery Clift that seemed to have no beginning, middle, or end. The studio audience, initially excited to see the famous writer, grew increasingly uncomfortable as the interview progressed. Nervous laughter erupted when Capote, apparently forgetting he was on national television, suddenly turned to Ed McMahon and asked if he could sit in the announcer's lap, "because you look so comfortable like a teddy bear." McMahon's stunned expression became one of the night's most memorable moments. Carson, ever the professional, tried valiantly to steer the conversation toward coherence. He repeatedly attempted to focus Capote with specific questions about his writing process or literary influences, lifelines that Capote consistently failed to grasp as he drifted into increasingly bizarre non sequiturs. The low point came approximately 12 minutes into the segment when Kapot attempted to take a sip of water and nearly missed the glass entirely, sending water down his chin and onto his shirt. Rather than acknowledge the mishap, he continued speaking as if nothing had happened, now with a large wet spot on his chest visible to millions of viewers. As the interview mercifully approached its conclusion, Carson signaled for an early commercial break, a rare move that he reserved for only the most dire interview situations. The camera caught him exhaling with visible relief as it cut away, a moment that wasn't supposed to be broadcast, but made it to air due to the director's delayed reaction. Backstage after the show, Carson reportedly told his producer that wasn't an interview. It was a hostage situation in slow motion. True to his word, Kapot never appeared on The Tonight Show again during Carson's remaining years as host, despite the author's literary stature and previous successful appearances. What made the Kapot incident particularly uncomfortable wasn't just his obvious intoxication, but the contrast between his brilliant public persona and the incoherent figure viewers witnessed that night. It represented a painful public glimpse of the demons that would eventually contribute to Kapot's declining health and career in his final years. A stark reminder of how substance abuse could undermine even the most towering intellect on national television. Time in my life. I wish to thank very much my director, Mr. Guy Green, to Shelley Winters, the hurricane in human form. If Johnny Carson maintained an unofficial ranking of his most challenging guests, Shelley Winters would undoubtedly have secured a place near the top. The two-time Academy Award winner was famous for her dramatic performances on screen. But her appearances on The Tonight Show often featured a different kind of drama, the kind fueled by pre-show cocktails and a complete disregard for the normal rules of television interviews. Winters' pattern of arriving at the studio well-lubricated was so consistent that Tonight Show staff had a standard protocol when she was booked. Place her in the second or third guest position rather than the opening slot, hoping she might sober up slightly while waiting backstage. This strategy rarely succeeded, as Winters typically continued drinking in her dressing room until the moment she was called to the stage. Her most notorious appearance came in 1974 when she was ostensibly booked to promote her autobiography. From the moment she walked on stage, noticeably unsteady in heels that suddenly seemed too high, viewers knew they were in for an unusual segment. Carson had barely finished introducing her when Winters launched into a rambling story completely unrelated to her book, interrupting him mid-sentence. What followed was television chaos. Winters talked over Carson repeatedly, cut off his questions, and at one point turned to directly address the studio audience as if Carson weren't there at all. When he attempted to steer the conversation back to her book, she dismissed his question with a wave of her hand, saying, "Oh, Johnny, nobody cares about that. Let me tell you what happened with Marlon Brando instead." The situation deteriorated further when another guest, a young actor promoting his first major film, joined them on the couch. Rather than allowing Carson to interview him, Winters continuously interrupted, at one point placing her hand on the visibly uncomfortable young man's knee while telling him he reminded her of a young Errol Flynn. When the actor attempted to answer Carson's question about his film, Winters loudly announced, "His movie isn't very good, but he's pretty to look at." Carson, normally the model of composed professionalism, showed rare visible frustration. Viewers could see his jaw tightening as he repeatedly tried and failed to regain control of his own show. At one point, the camera caught him shooting a desperate glance toward Ed McMahon, who merely shrugged helplessly from his sidekick chair. The breaking point came when Winters, apparently feeling that Carson wasn't being attentive enough to her stories, reached over and snatched his note cards from his hand, tossing them over her shoulder while announcing, "You won't be needing these, Johnny. I'm much more interesting." The cards scattered across the studio floor as the audience gasped. After finally managing to end the segment with another early commercial break, Carson reportedly told his producer, "If she's ever booked again, I'm taking that night off." True to his word, Winters disappeared from the Tonight Show guest list for nearly 3 years, an extraordinary blackout period for an actress of her stature. When she eventually returned in 1977, it was under strict conditions, including a noon interview time for the tape-delayed show, making extensive drinking beforehand less likely, and an understanding that any similar behavior would result in a permanent ban. As one staff writer succinctly described her approach to Tonight Show appearances, she didn't sip, she stormed. What made Winter's drunken appearances particularly challenging was that unlike some intoxicated guests who simply became incoherent, she,